Hey guys, tonight we're heading deep into the Persian desert. No AC, no bottled water, no shade, just you, the stars overhead, and ice. That's right. As the wind whispers through dry reeds and the sand crackles under your feet. You stumble across something strange, a cone-shaped mound half buried in the dust. No signs, no guards, just silence and the faintest breath of cool air drifting from a small, dark opening. You blink, rub your eyes. In the middle of all this heat, it feels like winter. You duck low and step inside. And that's when it hits you, a cold so crisp, so sudden, it steals your breath. The floor dips down into the earth, and even though it's easily 90 degrees outside down here, it feels like a walk-in freezer. The ceiling curves overhead like a giant earthen igloo, and your fingertips brush across clay walls slick with condensation. You squint into the gloom and realize that shimmer in the shadows. That's actual ice. Real, solid, ancient Persian ice hidden away in a refrigerator from over 2,000 years ago. You probably won't survive this journey without marveling at least once per minute. Between the scorching air, the cold chambers, and the mind-boggling ingenuity, your modern sensibilities might just implode. Who thought you could refrigerate ice in a desert where even lizards need sunscreen? So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. I love seeing where you're all tuning in from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You lean against the dome's thick outer wall. It's called a yakchal, a Persian word that means ice pit. You trace the curve of its ancient bricks, some still held together with a mortar called saruj, a waterproof mix of clay, sand, egg whites, lime, goat hair, and ash. No, really. It sounds like a cursed baking recipe, but it worked. This outer shell insulates the chamber like a thermos, blocking out solar heat while trapping the cold air inside. Even now, after all these centuries, the dome is standing strong, quietly guarding its frosty treasure like a loyal servant of winter. The Persian Empire at its height stretched across everything from Anatolia to the Indus Valley. And in a land where survival depended on water, innovation bloomed like desert roses. Ice was not just luxury, it was power, symbolic, ritualistic, delicious, a sign that even the sun couldn't conquer Persian engineering. But it wasn't just royalty licking snowberries off chilled silver plates. No, these yakchals were also community storage units. A place to stash fish from winter hauls, cool milk before it turned to yogurt, and preserve medicinal herbs during the brutal scorch of July. You meanwhile are just trying not to trip on the uneven stone steps as you descend further. Every breath feels like inhaling from a clay teacup left in a snowdrift. Moist, earthy, sharp. You pause and whisper to yourself, half in awe, half in disbelief. They did this with no fans, no electricity, no plastic wrap. And then there's the silence. Down here, beneath layers of packed mud and stone, sound dies. You hear your heartbeat. A drop of meltwater splashes somewhere in the dark. You feel strangely safe, like the dome has curled around you. A quiet rebellion against heat. Mainstream historians agree the earliest yakchals date back to at least 400 BCE, during the Achaemenid dynasty, yes. The same folks who gave us Cyrus the Great immortals with spears and a postal service that made Herodotus jealous. These structures dotted the landscape in towns like Yazd Kerman and Kashan. Each one slightly different, but always following the same principles: insulate, deep vent, high, orient, north, and always worship the physics of shade. But here's something fringe that might keep you up for a few more minutes. Some archaeologists believe yakchals may have been inspired by even older traditions from Mesopotamia, where temple priests stored sacred snow in pits lined with bitumen and palm wood. No one's proven it, of course. The sands tend to eat evidence. But still, you wonder if this dome is carrying whispers of Babylon beneath its bricks. You reach the bottom, where the cold is thickest. Your breath clouds before your face. In the soft, refracted gloom, you finally see it, a slab of ancient ice barely melting despite the desert rage outside. Your fingers twitch. You need to touch it. And when you do, yes, it's real, smooth, solid, freezing, and old enough that Alexander the Great might have ordered a chilled pomegranate slushy from a stash just like this. Historians still argue whether common people had regular access to these wonders or if they were tightly controlled by the elite. Some say priests managed them like temples. Others believe villages shared them communally. And a few the rebels of the historical community argue that some yakchals were multi-use bunkers, cold storage above storm shelter below. One last thing. Before you climb out, you spot a symbol carved faintly on the wall. A lotus, maybe a seal, maybe just graffiti. But it makes you wonder how many thousands of palms brushed these bricks before yours. You step back into the warmth. Night is almost over, but the yakchal, it will wait. Quiet, eternal, patient. You leave the hush of the underground chamber and step out into the night, blinking against the glare of starlight reflected on pale sand. The desert feels warmer now, exaggerated by the chill you just left behind. As your eyes adjust, your gaze lifts to the structure's full silhouette, and there it stands, proud and alien, this beehive-shaped monument to ancient physics, the yakchal. Its dome rises high and wide like a sand-colored spaceship that landed centuries ago and never bothered to leave. Smooth, symmetrical, and subtly beautiful, the structure feels both ancient and futuristic at once. You slowly circle it, your fingers brushing the sun-baked walls, still radiating the memory of daytime heat. But even out here, close to the outer shell, you sense it, the coolness inside bleeding through ever so slightly. It's not a trick. It's not a myth. The Persians really built ice makers in the middle of the desert, and they didn't need freon or solar panels to pull it off. The shape of the yakchal isn't just aesthetic, it's the first clue to its genius. That dome isn't random. It's an inverted funnel designed to trap rising hot air at the top, while allowing cooler air to settle downward. Think of it as ancient HVAC, a passive convection system. No moving parts, no clicks, no hisses, just the slow, reliable language of physics. You kneel near the small doorway, the only entrance, and notice it's facing away from the sun's path. Always north or northeast, always shaded. This isn't just a happy accident. The entire system is based on thermal strategy. During the day, the thick mud brick walls, often several feet deep, soak up the heat and stop it from entering. At night, when the desert air drops to near freezing, the stored goods inside chill even more. And the Persians didn't stop with architecture. Oh no, they used every environmental trick in the book. Shallow water channels were dug nearby and filled each evening, exposed to the freezing night sky. With no cloud cover and zero light pollution, the water would radiate heat straight into the vacuum of space, cooling rapidly, and often forming thin layers of ice by dawn. That ice would be carefully scraped and carried into the yakchal layer by layer, night after night, until the storage pit was full. Now imagine doing that by hand, every single night. You picture yourself in a rough wool tunic, sand in your teeth, hauling slushy water from a freezing channel by moonlight, while some supervisor shouts from the shadows to hurry up before it melts. Romantic, maybe not. Effective, absolutely. Mainstream historians hail these ice pits as marvels of sustainable engineering. Some even compare their efficiency to modern zero-energy buildings. The fact that these domes could keep perishable goods cold sometimes for months without a single watt of electricity is frankly mind-melting. But here's your quirky tidbit for the night. Ancient Persians didn't just use these domes for ice. They sometimes used them to age cheese. Yes, seriously. Deep within the chambers, among the packed snow and clay jars of rosewater, were goat milk cheeses buried in linen and ash to slowly ferment in controlled humidity. So, if you ever dreamed of snow-aged brie in a clay igloo, congratulations, someone beat you to the patent by 2.5 millennia. Still, debates linger. Some scholars argue that the real ice production only happened in highland areas where temperatures reliably dropped below freezing. Others insist the desert yakchals were just for storage, not production. The truth, probably a mix of both. Some served local needs, others were just glorified coolers for imported goods from colder regions. And as usual, historians still argue whether smaller rural domes were communal efforts or state-managed assets handed down through administrative dynasties. You sit on a flat rock and watch the desert stars glitter above you, sharp, brilliant, too many to count. Somewhere far off, a jackal yelps, and behind you, that ancient dome sits unmoving, unchanged. There's something profoundly comforting about it, like a time capsule that decided to just keep doing its job for eternity. Wind rustles a few dry grasses nearby, and you imagine the distant past. The sound of sandals scuffing stone, the hiss of boiling syrup being poured into ice to make sharbat, the sigh of a grandmother sending a child to fetch a chilled melon slice from the dome. How many stories these walls have witnessed, and how few they've told. You wipe your hands on your tunic mentally anyway, and begin retracing the steps of those ancient desert engineers. The question that won't leave your mind is the simplest one. How exactly did they manage to make ice in a place that regularly fries eggs on stone? You squint at the horizon. No snow-capped peaks nearby. No frosty rivers trickling in from Siberia. Just sand stars and a climate that could probably bake a loaf of flatbread if you left it on a tile too long. But then just as the desert begins to feel smug about its heat, you spot the system. Just behind the Yakchal's dome lies a shallow basin, flat and wide, barely a few inches deep. It glows faintly under the starlight, smooth as glass. You walk to the edge and stare down. Water. Still. Waiting. This is where the magic happened, or rather the physics. Every night, Persian engineers would flood these channels and basins, letting the desert's natural chill take over. Here's the trick: deserts cool down fast at night. With no humidity and no clouds to trap heat, the earth releases its warmth into the vacuum of space like an open wound. And when waters spread thin across wide, flat surfaces, it gives up its own heat even faster. It doesn't need to freeze solid. Even a thin crust of ice is enough to start the harvest. You crouch by the edge, imagining someone centuries ago doing the same. Maybe they'd toss a pebble into the water to test its firmness. Maybe they had tricks like timing the frost by the brightness of a certain constellation or the feel of the wind. Superstitions woven into engineering. The workers would rise before dawn, scraping ice with wooden paddles and piling it into wheelbarrows lined with straw or cloth. The goal wasn't speed, it was patience. Ice wasn't stockpiled in a day, it was layered like lasagna. Every frosty night brought another sheet. And the Yakchal, with its deep subterranean pit, welcomed each delivery like treasure. Bit by bit, the pit filled with frozen white. Some historians believe this process began in late autumn and stretched deep into winter. Others argue the timing varied wildly, depending on location and weather patterns. Historians still argue whether the Persians used additives like salt or plant extracts to increase freezing efficiency, or whether the purity of their desert water did the trick naturally. The evidence is patchy, but the ingenuity isn't. And it wasn't just ice for eating or cooling wine. Sometimes it was used for preservation of food, yes, but also of the body. You pause on that thought. A corpse kept cold while family made the long journey for burial rites. It sounds grim, but also oddly respectful. You wouldn't want Uncle Darius melting in the courtyard. Here's a quirky little nugget for you. There are travelers' accounts, mostly from much later centuries, describing children being allowed to sneak chips of ice from the yakchal for summer treats, but only under supervision. Ice theft apparently was a real concern, especially when the local ruler had ordered a frozen dessert banquet for visiting nobles. One missing chunk could ruin the entire sorbet centerpiece. Ice was so prized that it had guards' locks and in some cases curses. You laugh quietly. Ancient Persian ice more secure than your email password. You shift your weight and glance toward the horizon. The night is aging. A faint blue blush brushes the edge of the sky. Soon the sun will stretch back across the desert like a golden lion. But for now, you imagine the basin slowly frosting over molecule by molecule as desert air turns frigid and still. There's a kind of reverence in the simplicity. No coal, no wires, just wind, water, and time. The Persians understood that if you couldn't fight the environment, you had to outthink it. They didn't conquer the heat, they tricked it one cool breath at a time. You press your palm flat against the rim of the basin. It's cold. Not ice cold, but cool enough to remember. And that's what this whole thing is, isn't it? A memory machine. A way for time to preserve itself in frost and clay. Tomorrow these basins will be dry again. The dome will sit quietly in the sun. But tonight, while the stars still rule the sky, water freezes in the desert. And you're here to see it. You stay crouched beside the basin a little longer, your fingers brushing its smooth edge until the first sliver of dawn breaks across the horizon. The chill that settled over the desert like a wool blanket begins to retreat. But you're not done, not by a long shot. As you stand and stretch, a breeze picks up gentle and whispering, curling past your neck, like the exhale of some ancient spirit. That's when you notice it, a strange opening at the base of the dome set low like a wide mouth inhaling. You step closer and feel it, the unmistakable movement of air, cool and slow, flowing inward. This isn't just a hole. It's part of something larger. A system. A secret. You duck down, peer inside, and realize this is where wind becomes an accomplice to refrigeration. Welcome to Evaporative Cooling Ancient Persian Edition. Around you, scattered across the sandy plains, are the faint remnants of wind catchers or badgirs. You've seen drawings of these odd tower-like structures before, jutting up like periscopes from houses in cities like Yazd or Kerman. But here they're smaller, simpler, low vents cleverly placed to siphon air down into the yakchal. These openings harnessed the desert breeze, drawing it into the storage chamber, where it picked up moisture from the stored ice or shallow water channels and cooled the air further through evaporation. It's the same principle behind sweating. Your body releases moisture, wind hits it, and voila, cooling. Now imagine that principle scaled up to a dome big enough to store a ton of ice with no fans, no chillers, no humming compressors. Just wind and water whispering to each other. You lie down on the packed earth, looking up through a narrow shaft that connects the interior to the dome's apex. This vent allows hot air to rise naturally and escape while heavier, cool air sinks and circulates slowly below. Passive air conditioning perfected before Rome even had plumbing. Modern engineers still study these designs, scratching their heads and whispering how as they walk beneath the vaulted brick. In fact, passive cooling systems modeled after the yakchal and badgir combination are now finding their way into modern eco-architecture across the globe, from California libraries to Dubai shopping centers. But here's a fringe detail you won't find in many textbooks. Some archaeologists speculate that these air channels weren't just functional, they were sacred. Lined with inscriptions or symbols, they may have also served ritual purposes. In some surviving domes, there's evidence of ceramic figurines or carved rosettes placed strategically within vents, possibly to invoke protection from evil or drought. Historians still argue whether these decorations were spiritual tools or just architectural flair, but you can't help feeling like the wind here carries more than just temperature. Maybe it carries memory too. You sit up and run your hand along the floor. There's a thin film of moisture, evidence of the evaporative process in action. If you listen closely, you can hear the faintest drip-drip from inside the pit, like a meditation bell in a distant temple. It's the sound of water being turned into cold. Slowly, faithfully. And then you remember something, a line from a medieval Persian poem. You whisper it aloud clumsily, translated in your head. In the heat of night, I sent my sorrow to the wind, and in the hollow of clay, it froze before morning. You smirk. Poets always knew more than they let on. There's humor in this too if you look for it. Imagine being a royal engineer charged with protecting the summer ice stash, only to find some desert goats had wandered in overnight and turned your basin into a hoof-print mosaic. Or picture the poor apprentice who forgot to close a wind catcher vent before a sandstorm and ended up storing 30 pounds of nicely chilled grit. Not every day was a triumph of physics, but even through trial and error, the system endured. The wind carried its lessons forward, and each season the domes were patched. The basins scrubbed the air, channels realigned to follow new wind patterns. This wasn't just invention, it was tradition. Repeated, remembered, revered. You finally rise, brushing dust from your clothes, and turn back to the dome. Light is creeping down its curve, now golden and patient. You watch as the breeze flows into its secret passageways, cooler than it has any right to be. And somewhere beneath your feet, the ice remains unmoved, unbothered, unmelted. As the desert warms with the rising sun, you begin to understand that beneath the miracle of cold, there is an even older, deeper miracle: water. Hidden water. Water that flows not on the surface, but under your very feet. You pause, tilt your head, and listen. Nothing. But if you dig down deep enough, you'd hear it, the soft whisper of qanats. The ancient Persians didn't just rely on passive cooling and surface tricks. They built underground lifelines. Qanats, subterranean tunnels dug at a gentle slope, funneled water from far-off mountain aquifers into the heart of the desert. You can't see them, but they're there, dark arteries beneath the dust, bringing life to places where rain forgets to fall. You start walking. The sun's heat is still gentle, but it will get brutal soon. As your sandals crunch over gravel and the occasional sharp tuft of dry grass, you spot a small depression in the landscape, almost like a collapsed burrow. You approach, peer down, and realize it's a qanat shaft, a maintenance hole, one of hundreds evenly spaced like stitches across the land. They're how workers accessed the tunnel during construction and repairs. You sit on the edge and dangle your legs. It's deep. Maybe 15 meters, maybe more. You can't see the bottom, only feel the breath of cooler air rising up like a sigh from the earth itself. That's the beauty of qanats. They're not pressurized. No pumps. Just gravity and patience. Water flows downhill quietly, invisibly across miles. And when it finally emerges near a Yakchal basin, it's already cool because the tunnel kept it shaded and underground for the whole journey. This system predates most of the world's plumbing. Long before Rome's aqueducts or London's sewers, Persian engineers were already carving water highways beneath the soil. Some qanats stretch over 50 kilometers, linking distant foothills with desert towns that had no business surviving, but did thanks to this buried gift. Historians still argue whether the qanat system originated in Persia or was borrowed and improved from earlier Mesopotamian irrigation ideas. What's clear is that the Persians mastered it. They made a science of slope calculating gradients with astonishing accuracy, using simple tools like plumb lines, water levels, and lots of eyeballing. And somehow it worked. Here's a quirky image for you teams of barefoot workers crawling underground by lamplight, digging forward inch by inch using donkeys to haul out soil in buckets. Occasionally, one worker would miscalculate and tunnel straight into a pocket of sand or a forgotten lava tube, and the whole qanat would collapse like a flan in a cupboard. Cue swearing, cue rebuilding, cue lessons learned. But the real marvel, some qanats still work, right now. You could hike through parts of Iran today and drink from the same underground channel that's been flowing for over 2,000 years. The water would be clean, cool, and slightly mineral-rich, perfect for storage, perfect for ice making. You lean back on your elbows and glance across the valley. In the distance, you spot a string of old trees, pistachios maybe, or date palms lined up like a green serpent through the sand. Their presence gives away the qanat's path. In a desert, nothing grows unless it's got secrets under the soil. You imagine being a kid growing up here, learning which hole leads to which tunnel, watching your grandfather drop a pebble down a shaft and timing how long it takes to splash, measuring the sound, tasting the difference in water from each outlet. Not every child had a creek, but here they had qanats, hidden but constant. It's kind of magical. And it wasn't just about drinking or farming. These channels fed the yakchals, literally. Some basins were designed to connect directly to the qanat, letting the water slowly trickle in at night. Cold water, night air, shallow pools, ice. Simple, elegant, silent. You return to your feet and walk along the depression line. Every few hundred meters, another shaft. Another breath from the ground. You start to feel like the earth is alive. Not in a mystical way, but in a lived-in way, like a house that's been occupied so long it starts to creak and sigh, just to keep you company. And in this house, the ice makers and water bearers were the real architects. You follow the faint line of qanat shafts until it loops you back toward the yakchal, its beehive form now fully bathed in sunlight. Up close, its surface glows the color of bone, dull white, streaked with ochre, cracked in places, but still intact. You run your hand across its surface and it feels dry, dense, and strangely smooth. It's not just mud brick. It's something more. That's when you remember the name saruj, the ancient Persian plaster that waterproofed these domes from the inside out. You crouch, press your fingertips into a flake near the base and try to peel it loose. No luck. It's like trying to scrape ice cream off a stone wall. This stuff has stuck around for over 2 millennia. Saruj was the secret sauce. More than mud. More than lime. It was a carefully crafted composite of natural materials. Clay, sand, ash, lime, goat hair. Even egg whites blended into a mixture so durable it could resist both moisture and heat. The Persians essentially made concrete without cement. The dome's entire interior would be coated in layers of this concoction, each polished smooth, each sealed against the elements like a vault. You lean in closer and sniff. There's no smell now, but back then, it must have reeked during application. Goat hair and egg whites baking under a desert sun. Whoever the ancient version of a health inspector was, they must have had a strong stomach. Mainstream historians marvel at how effective this material was, especially considering the lack of thermometers, pH meters, or Google. The Persians didn't have formulas, they had feel. They learned how long to mix, how much to stir, when the mud was too wet, or the lime too dry. It was craftsmanship passed down by memory and muscle. And the payoff, an interior that stayed dry even as condensation formed. No mildew, no leaks, no mushy food supplies. You glance upward, imagining the layers above you, each working together to lock in the chill. It's a thermal sandwich, the outer bricks blocking heat, the sarouge lining preserving cold, and the air inside circulating like a quiet ghost. But here's a curious detail. Some yakchals were even insulated with ashes from fire pits layered between walls like insulation foam. Why ash doesn't conduct heat well, and it's cheap. You throw it away after cooking, so why not use it to keep your royal ice from becoming royal soup? And just to add a little flair, in a few older domes, tiny ceramic jars were embedded directly into the wall. Some believe they helped with airflow. Others think they were early versions of hygrometers measuring moisture by watching how quickly water evaporated from the pot's surface. And of course, some historians still argue whether they were purely functional or had ritual meaning tied to Zoroastrian symbols of purity and fire. You circle the dome imagining teams of builders hauling baskets of sand and bricks smearing the sarouge by hand, layer by layer, under the shouted guidance of a foreman who'd done this 20 times before. No gloves, no blueprints, just intuition and sweat. Then, with the dome finally sealed, the waiting began. Ice would be brought in, goods would be stacked, and the structure would be sealed up, sometimes with thick wool curtains, sometimes with carved wooden doors. In some cases, these doors had tiny slits to monitor temperature or peek inside without letting warm air rush in. Think of it as a Bronze Age thermostat. You chuckle. If it's cold enough to make your teeth hurt, when you peek in, you're doing great. You pause at the entrance again. Sunlight glints off the cracked surface. It's over 100 degrees out here now, but the air just inside still feels noticeably cooler. That's the sarouge doing its job even after centuries of sun, rain, and silence. You close your eyes and try to imagine what it sounded like in there long ago. The scrape of wooden sledges across stone, the plop of ice into the pit, the quiet hum of stored melons, herbs, fish, and snowberries sleeping beneath layers of shadow. You can almost smell the rosewater. You step back inside the dome, letting your eyes adjust to the shadows once again. Even after the searing desert heat outside the chamber remains remarkably cool. You take a slow breath. The silence wraps around you like a cloak, interrupted only by the occasional drip of condensation and the whisper of air that somehow still circulates without effort. But how does it actually stay this cold? You lower yourself near the edge of the pit and remember a lesson from physics class you may or may not have slept through. Heat rises. Cold air sinks, and that's exactly the principle the Persians used. The interior of the yakchal dips below ground, sometimes as deep as 5 or 6 meters. This creates a natural cold trap where chilled air settles at the bottom, and warm air, if it dares to enter, gets pulled up and out through the dome's chimney vent. The dome itself acts like a thermal buffer. During the day, the thick walls absorb outside heat but slow its transmission inward. By night, they release that warmth into the cooler air. That means even in peak summer, the inside of a well-designed yakchal stays several degrees cooler than the outside. And when packed with ice, it's practically cryogenic. It's passive engineering, but it's also deeply mathematical. The Persians didn't have spreadsheets, but they understood geometry. The dome's parabolic shape isn't just pretty, it distributes stress evenly, resists collapse, and maximizes volume to surface area ratio, which is fancy speak for more space inside without leaking too much coolness. That kind of knowledge didn't come from chance. It came from centuries of trial, error, and observation. And probably a few domes that failed in very dramatic ways. You walk a slow circle around the interior perimeter, running your hand along the curved wall. The chill is strongest near the bottom, just as it should be. Somewhere in your mind, you picture heat transfer diagrams, arrows pointing out, gradients sliding downward. Ancient Persia understood thermodynamics long before we had the word for it. Historians still argue whether this knowledge was passed on in formal schools or through apprenticeship. There's no known treatise from the Achaemenid period that explains yakhchal design in detail. Yet the consistency of these structures across regions, some almost identical in form, suggests a shared body of architectural intelligence. Whether preserved in guild secrets or whispered at fire-lit building sites, the knowledge was sacred, and sometimes these domes weren't alone. You exit the main chamber again and walk a short distance where a half-ruined wall catches your attention. It's part of a compound, likely once surrounded by shaded verandas or small storehouses. In some sites, yakhchals were just the centerpiece of larger complexes, ice kitchens, if you will. They were connected to markets, bakeries, even caravanserais. Ice wasn't just preserved for health or ritual. It was part of commerce. And here's your quirky tidbit for this stretch. Some Persian texts suggest that chilled rosewater mixed with ground snow was used as a perfume and a remedy. If you had a fever, ice. If you wanted to impress a noble guest, ice. If your camel had heat stroke. Yes, someone probably tried using ice. In wealthier towns, these domes even became a kind of civic pride. There are inscriptions describing local competitions, who could store ice longer into summer, who could chill the sweetest melons, who could make the best sorbet. Imagine that ancient Iran hosting an ice cream festival in July with 0 refrigerators. You wonder if there were trophies, maybe an honorary garland of mint leaves. The funny part is the Persians didn't really need all this cold. They'd survived without it for centuries. But once they mastered it, they leaned in hard. This wasn't survival. It was sophistication. A show of control not just over the desert but over time itself, preserving summer's bounty, delaying rot, freezing the moment. You sit at the edge of the storage pit again, feeling the coolness seep up through the soles of your feet. The sun is now high outside, and the dome begins to glow softly from within a dim cathedral of ancient science. No machines, no motors, no switches, just shape, shade, earth, and air. You climb to your feet and dust off your hands as the air inside the dome shifts slightly. It's not imagination. The breeze that once blew inward has begun to slow, signaling the desert outside is reaching full furnace mode. The yakhchal holds its chill like a stubborn camel holding a grudge, but outside life is moving fast, and not just the sun. It's time you met the real stars of the Persian ice industry, the traders. Because yes, that ice wasn't just staying put, it moved. You step outside and shield your eyes. In the distance, a caravan once traced its way through these same hills, camels strung in a line, hooves, tapping dry stone drivers, shouting rhythmic calls to keep the pace. And in the middle of those convoys, chests of ice, covered in straw, wrapped in thick, oiled cloth, tied down tight. The thought is absurd, isn't it, hauling ice across the desert? But that's what they did often at night, when temperatures dipped, and always with speed. You imagine being part of that crew. Your job is to escort one block of crystal-cold treasure from the yakhchal at Yazd to a palace in Susa or a banquet in Persepolis. It's not a job, it's a responsibility. Because if you mess up, the sorbet turns to slush, and the queen's birthday party is ruined. In elite Persian households, especially during the Achaemenid and later the Sasanian periods, ice became a symbol of sophistication. It meant you had access. It meant you had power. You didn't need chilled pomegranate seeds, but if you served them in a bowl of snow at your midsummer feast, that was status. That was flex. Mainstream historical accounts point to elaborate festivals where ice was part of the cuisine, blended with fruit syrups into early sorbets or pressed into molds to shape decorative blocks of edible snow. You picture a gold tray with a snowflake carved from ice topped with saffron syrup and a single violet petal. Over the top, Did it matter? Absolutely not. Here's a wonderfully strange detail. There are records from much later Islamic-era Persian writings that mention ice used in medicine. Fevered patients were offered snow slush. Hot-tempered children, literally and metaphorically, were cooled with cloths soaked in melted ice. One text even mentions preserving eye drops in yakchals to maintain their clarity. Historians still argue whether these remedies were grounded in humoral theory or just desert common sense. But hey, cold compresses never go out of style. And then there's the economic side. Ice had value. Not just symbolic, but financial. Merchants paid taxes on it, storage fees, guard wages. In bustling cities like Rai or Isfahan, ice sellers operated stalls, cool cloth awnings, pots buried in sand, shouting hawkers selling chilled drinks to passers-by. You imagine one now, a young boy grinning as he ladles out iced honey water to a sweaty traveler who swears it's the best thing he's tasted since spring. But it wasn't all smooth gliding across golden dunes. The desert, like any good antagonist, had its opinions. Sandstorms, bandits, overheating camels. One gust of hot wind at the wrong time, and your precious ice could become an expensive puddle in a wicker basket. You chuckle quietly. Somewhere in an ancient account, there's probably a story about an ambitious young trader who lost half his cargo because he took a shortcut near a salt flat. Still, some shipments made it all the way to royal courts, where Persian kings seated beneath cedar awnings would sip chilled rosewater and glance meaningfully at their guests like, "Yes, that's real ice. In August. You may now be impressed." And it wasn't just about the refreshment. It was about the idea that even the fiercest desert couldn't stop Persian ambition. That a block of frozen water born under the stars in a mud-brick dome could travel across miles of heat and still glisten on a silver tray. You sit on a nearby stone, the yakchal behind you now, glowing like a pearl in the noonday light. You imagine one of those ancient ice caravans passing by right here, dust rising, bells jingling, and the driver giving you a nod. As if to say, "This is how we beat the sun." You rise from the sun-warmed stone and circle the dome once more this time, noticing something curious near its base, a narrow passage leading to a smaller chamber partially collapsed. You step cautiously inside. The air here is drier, mustier. No ice. But something else lingers, the unmistakable scent of herbs and old dust. This was more than a freezer. This was a pantry, a larder, a shrine to things that spoil if left to the sun. You crouch beside a series of half-buried clay jars, their necks broken or worn smooth. Inside, faded traces of dried fish, crushed dates, maybe powdered yogurt. This part of the yakchal was cold storage, not just for ice, but for everything else that benefited from its chill. Dried fruit, sour milk, fresh herbs, even medicines. In your mind's eye, the space comes to life, shelves carved from stone baskets suspended from the ceiling, with rope small amphora lined up like sleepy sentinels. A teenage apprentice sneaks a bite of salted goat meat when no one's looking. A grandmother carefully measures out a pinch of sumac preserved in clay. You wonder what the smell was like when it was in full use, fragrant, earthy, maybe a little funky, but unmistakably alive. Historians often focus on the ice because it's dramatic. But many yakchals served as year-round coolers for goods that simply couldn't survive Persian summers in the open. Think of it as a fridge with different compartments. Ice in the deepest pit, perishables in the mid-level shelves, dried and sealed goods near the door. Temperature zoning before thermostats. Clever? No. And it wasn't just for food. There are records often overlooked of scented oils and cosmetics being stored in cool domes. Imagine rose oil, thick and heady, kept in clay jars under damp cloths so it wouldn't go rancid. Imagine chilled eyeliner paste being applied to noble cheeks before a feast. And if you're wondering, yes, cold wine was very much a thing. Not iced like modern cocktails, but cooled just enough to impress a dinner guest, and make summer feel indulgent. Here's your quirky detail for this chapter in one rare document. From the Safavid era, there's mention of a desert sorbet shop run by women who stored flavored snow in a modified yakchal. They offered sweetened ice with grape syrup or tamarind handed out in clay cups for a coin or two. It was said their frozen treats cured melancholy, or perhaps just made it a bit more tolerable. Some historians still argue whether that shop was real or poetic exaggeration, but if it's a myth, it's one worth believing. You move deeper into the ruins of the storage annex and find a collapsed wall of packed earth. Behind it, a tunnel may be collapsed too. You don't go further, but you imagine the layout, cold air channeling gently from the main dome through side corridors, keeping the temperature stable in connected spaces. A whole system, not just a room. You think of modern kitchens, stainless steel, humming appliances, shelves and drawers that open with a whisper. And then you think of this place, quiet, scent-laden, built from sun-dried mud and mathematical instinct. One cool breath away from the desert's wrath. Historians believe some larger yakchal complexes had seasonal cycles filled in winter, used through spring, and by midsummer, they'd pivot to storing longer-lasting goods or dry preserves. Then autumn came and preparations began again, scraping basins, patching plaster, rebuilding whatever time and weather had taken. A rhythm, a tradition, a community ritual. You place your hand against the broken jar beside you. It's rough, pitted with age. Someone once sealed it with cloth and wax. Someone once counted on it to keep a week's worth of figs from fermenting into a disaster. And you realize, not for the first time tonight, that ancient engineering was never just about the how. It was about the why. Why go to all this trouble? Why carve tunnels and bake bricks and layer goat hair with lime? Because survival demands more than food. It demands care, predictability, comfort, a cooled drink on a hot day, a bite of melon that still tastes like the season it came from. A place where memory can sit quietly, surrounded by the smell of mint and the hum of wind. You step back into the sun, the scent of the past clinging to your clothes. You squint toward the horizon, where the desert shimmers under the early afternoon sun. A trick of the heat makes distant hills wobble like mirages, but there nestled among them is another story. Not one of ice or jars, but of ideas. Because even as the Persians were perfecting their yakchals across the Mediterranean, the Greeks were writing about deserts they didn't understand. You plop down on a flat stone and imagine Herodotus, that endlessly curious Greek traveler, trying to make sense of Persian refrigeration. He called Persia a land of marvels, rivers that flowed without rain, cities where shadows moved unnaturally, and people who could trap winter under clay. You laugh softly. He wasn't wrong, just confused. In his writings, there's a passage about a mysterious Persian structure that preserves snow beyond its season. No detailed explanation, no diagrams, just awe. Some historians believe he may have glimpsed a yakchal or heard stories of them secondhand. Others think it was pure traveler's myth, a tale told in a bazaar by someone trying to sell him chilled rosewater. Historians still argue whether the Greeks truly grasped the engineering behind Persian cooling systems, or if they dismissed it as sorcery wrapped in mud. After all, Greek architecture emphasized grandeur, marble columns, open courtyards, echoing forums. Persia, meanwhile, leaned into function, shade, silence, earth. But that didn't stop the exchange of ideas. Over time, Hellenistic engineers borrowed bits and pieces, cooling pools, shaded atriums, even early forms of wind channels. It's a reminder that knowledge rarely travels in a straight line. It spills, it seeps. Like the air inside a yakchal, it moves where the pressure allows. You walk a few steps, then stop before a row of mud brick platforms now eroded into lumps. Once this may have been part of a teaching area. Yes, some yakchals doubled as places of learning. Elders trained apprentices here using rods to trace wind directions in the sand, or letting boys map the movement of stars to time the freezing process. Geometry met astronomy. Building met belief, and not just in Persia. Evidence of domed passive cooling structures appears in parts of ancient Afghanistan, Turkmenistan, even Western India. Some may have been inspired by Persian designs. Others may have arisen independently. The question isn't who invented what. It's who paid attention to nature and who had the patience to learn from it. Here's a quirky tidbit for this chapter in one fragment of a Hellenistic travelogue. Possibly apocryphal, a Greek merchant in Babylon writes of a Persian dome that breathes like a sleeping beast and gives cold without fire. He thought it was alive. His guide reportedly laughed, then handed him a piece of ice wrapped in fig leaves. You can't blame him. When you sit here on this cracked desert floor with cool air slipping from a mud brick dome while your sandals melt nearby, it does feel like magic. Or maybe nature's way of saying, congratulations, you've finally figured me out. You trace a spiral pattern in the dirt with your fingertip. Spirals like these were etched into the walls of some yakchals too. Scholars still debate their meaning. Were they decorative, symbolic? Did they represent the wind, the sun's path? Or were they just doodles from bored architects waiting for plaster to dry? Whatever the answer, the message endures. Persian engineering wasn't just utilitarian. It was intentional, harmonized with its environment. Earth cooled earth. Water taught wind how to move. Shade became an art. And while Greek philosophers mused on metaphysics, and the sole Persian builders tuned their minds to air currents and thermal mass, both noble, both needed. But only one could give you cold melon slices in July. You lean back and stare at the dome's peak, now gleaming like a pearl against the blue. You wonder how many foreign visitors stood here blinking in disbelief, wondering how their hosts pulled ice from the air. You wonder how many wrote it off as illusion. And you wonder how many apprentices, hammer in hand, swore they'd build an even better one someday, and maybe did. You wander back toward the yakchal, the dome now casting a protective shadow that feels almost maternal. It's not just a building, it's a presence. But even something as stoic as this wasn't immune to drama. Because once you start cooling water in the desert, sooner or later, someone's going to want to steal that secret. And tonight, you're going to entertain a delicious possibility that ancient Persian refrigeration may have sparked acts of sabotage, betrayal, and espionage. Cold War Desert Edition. You squat down beside the wind inlet, half hidden in scrub. A perfect place for an intruder to eavesdrop. You picture a shadow slinking through the sands, robe's dark face wrapped against dust, eyes narrowed with calculation. Maybe he's a foreign agent, a Greek, a Babylonian, a court official from a rival satrapy trying to impress his king with new technologies. Whoever he is, he's here for one reason: to crack the code of ice in the inferno. Historians still argue whether industrial espionage existed in ancient times. But let's be honest, people have always wanted an edge, and the Persians guarded their innovations well. Craft knowledge was passed orally, often within families or guilds. Some domes were reportedly built with sealed blueprints, if any existed at all. The lack of written records might not be oversight. It might be intentional. You imagine a scenario: a merchant from another empire is invited to a Persian feast. He marvels at the chilled honey wine. He compliments the host, asks innocent questions. Where do you store the ice? How do you keep it from melting? And the host, polite but practiced, smiles and answers every question with a story about divine blessings and mountain spirits. Classic misdirection. And then there's this strange, half-forgotten detail from an old Zoroastrian text, a brief line about ice stolen in the year of the sand curse. It never clarifies who took it or what the curse involved, but the implication is someone crossed a serious line. Stealing snow in the desert. That's practically heresy. Back in your current timeline, you stroll past the dome's southern side, its most fortified wall. There are no openings here, no wind catchers, just solid saruj. It's where guards would have stood watch. Some yakchals even had small rooms nearby for night watchmen or storage of tools. You picture a weary old man with a crooked staff and a tendency to nod off just before something important happens. Quirky fact: one dome in Yazd was found to have a trapdoor sealed with a carved stone lid. Underneath, a tiny bone-dry chamber full of nothing but broken pottery and oddly 3 melted lumps of what might have been bronze tools. Maybe a decoy stash, or maybe a message. Don't try to mess with our ice. We'll know. You smile. The idea that cold could be valuable enough to fight over feels absurd. But think again. When a chunk of ice could buy you favor at court, or extend the life of your mother's medicine, suddenly it becomes more than a luxury. It's leverage. And when rival kings started hearing whispers that the Persians could chill Sorbet in July, you can bet they sent scouts. Not armies, not diplomats, but the quiet kind of men. The ones who listen more than they talk. The ones who memorize wind direction and construction layouts and report back without leaving a footprint. Some scholars say it's nonsense, that no one would risk war over frozen water. But others point to letters found in clay tablets detailing payments for observation of structure or recording of flow. They never mention yakchals by name. But the timing, suspicious. You sit again, this time facing the west, watching the sun begin its long descent. Its rays hit the dome just right, casting a perfect semicircle shadow across the ground. And for a brief moment, the structure seems to vanish into its own geometry, just a curve, a breath, a presence that exists outside of time. And somewhere buried in the dust are secrets no spy ever quite uncovered. The sun dips lower now, drawing long shadows across the ground. The desert exhales, releasing the heat it's held all day. You wander to the edge of a village not ancient but still old enough that its bones remember empires. Mud brick homes lean gently into each other. In the center, under a thatched awning, people gather. And you notice something peculiar: laughter, flickering lanterns, the scent of something sweet, and a shallow basin ringed with buckets of snow. Welcome to the ice ceremony. It wasn't always solemn in the world of yakchals. Sometimes it was celebration. Because once the hard work of collecting, storing, and protecting ice was done, what remained could be shared. Slowly, deliberately, deliciously. And tonight, under the stars, it's time to party. You slip into the gathering like a ghost, careful not to disturb the rhythm. An elder ladles something amber and fragrant from a bronze pot. A young boy carries it to a guest in a small cup set with flakes of ice. The guest lifts it, sips, and sighs. It's sharbat, a syrup made from herbs, fruit, and flower petals poured over crushed snow. This isn't just refreshment, it's ritual. In some parts of ancient Persia, festivals marked the end of the ice harvest. These celebrations weren't grand royal affairs, but humble local gatherings. Neighbors brought candied dates, roasted chickpeas, and little bowls of rosewater. Children were allowed to touch the ice only with clean hands, and women would whisper prayers over the blocks, thanking the dome for preserving what the sun tried to take. You watch as one woman presses a palm gently to the ice, then touches her forehead. Not religious exactly. Not scientific either. Something older. A ritual born from gratitude and awe. Historians don't agree on the extent of these festivals. Some say they were rare, celebrated only in towns with enough wealth to spare ice for celebration. Others believe they were as common as the harvest, tied not to abundance, but to survival. The line between the two, after all, is often just a matter of degrees. Here's a charming, quirky fact. One surviving folk tale from Kerman tells of a village where the ice was said to sing when it was pure enough. On the hottest day of the year, they'd gather and listen. If the dome echoed like a chime when opened, it meant the gods were pleased and the crops would thrive. If it stayed silent, well, more mint tea and hope for better luck next time. You notice a small girl carrying a handful of herbs, basil, lavender, and something you don't recognize. She tosses them onto the melting edge of the ice, watching them vanish in a puff of scent. Others follow, creating a mini incense ceremony with vapor instead of smoke. This blending of earth, water, air, and aroma, it's not about the ingredients. It's about memory. Every scent connects the people here to their ancestors, to those who once dug the qanats, built the domes, and whispered to the wind. You're offered a bowl, simple and chipped. Inside, slivers of almond-soaked raisins, snow. You take a bite. Cold, sweet, impossible. For a second, you forget the dust in your lungs, the grit in your teeth, the miles you've walked. You just exist in the chill of a 1,000-year-old gift melting on your tongue. The village elder eyes, wrinkled like parchment, catches your gaze and smiles. Cold is not the opposite of heat, he murmurs. It's the memory of stillness. You think about that. All day the desert moved, wind, heat, sound, light. But here in the dome's shadow, with ice singing under herbs and stories floating in the air, time seems to fold. Pause. Lean in close. You rise again and step back. The celebration hums behind you, a soft chorus of clinks, laughter, and ritual. Overhead stars begin to puncture the velvet dark. The ice won't last the night. It will melt. It always does. That's the point. But the memory of coolness that stays. You leave the village lights behind and return to the yakchal, drawn by the quiet. The celebration fades into a gentle murmur as you walk the path alone, your sandals brushing the sand in soft, rhythmic shuffles. The dome rises before you again, immense, silent, and watchful. But now you're not looking at it with curiosity. You're looking at it with reverence. This isn't a relic, it's a survivor. The Persian Empire fell. Kings changed. Scripts faded. Languages twisted and turned. And yet somehow this dome remains whole or in pieces, but still here. Even now in the modern city of Yazd, you can find yakchals standing tall beside highways and grocery stores, half swallowed by time but undeniably present. They don't serve ice anymore. Not always. But their form, their shadow, it still teaches. You walk around to the far side, where the bricks are older, more weather-worn. Some are missing. Others have slumped, creating a jagged scar down one edge. An earthquake, possibly. The region's known for them. Some domes cracked, others crumbled completely, and some miraculously endured, patched and maintained by generations of hands that understood their worth. Historians catalog the surviving yakchals like rare animals. There's the one in Maybad, still perfectly conical, its plaster glowing white under floodlights. The one in Kerman, its wind catchers restored to functionality. Others lie broken in empty plains, their bricks scavenged for homes, their names forgotten. But even ruins can whisper. You crouch near one of those scars and trace the outline of a brick with your finger. Imagine the man who set it, soaked in sweat, the desert sun relentless. He didn't know if the dome would still stand in 100 years, let alone 2,000. He just knew it had to work now, and perhaps that's the most human part of all this. The builders of yakchals weren't thinking about museums or drone footage. They were thinking about food that wouldn't spoil, children who wouldn't get heat fever, brides who could serve iced milk at their wedding, cool water during mourning. They were thinking small, intimate, practical. Yet somehow in building for the present, they created something eternal. You pause as a gust of wind dances around the dome and enters one of its vents. It makes a low, breathy sound, like a sigh or a song. The dome, it seems, is still exhaling, still participating. Here's a detail most visitors miss. Yakhchals were rarely painted. They didn't need it. The clay surface, especially when mixed with lime and ash, reflected sunlight and resisted weathering better than any pigment. And yet in the cracks, archaeologists have found signs of pigment anyway. Tiny flecks of blue or green. Perhaps symbols. Perhaps names. Perhaps a way of marking the structure as more than storage, as sacred. Historians still argue whether certain yakhchals doubled as ceremonial spaces. Some believe they were linked to seasonal rites. Others argue that's romantic fantasy. But as you sit here in the deepening dusk, the dome doesn't feel entirely utilitarian. It feels wise. And then there's the strange case of the Weeping Dome. In the outskirts of an old caravan town, there's a yakhchal that drips constantly, its clay surface never fully dry even in high summer. Locals say it's cursed. Others say it's blessed. Engineers suspect a hidden spring beneath. No one's found it yet. But the story persists. People still leave offerings, flowers, salt, strands of dried mint. You lean your head against the dome's base and close your eyes. Behind your lids, 1,000 moments flicker. Builders stacking bricks under moonlight. Traders rushing to deliver a frozen melon. Children pressing ears to the walls to hear the ice stream. Elders sealing jars with twine and beeswax. Generations. Heat. Cold. Time. The yakhchal is not just a structure, it's a memory engine. You wonder how long this one will last. Another 100 years, 200, maybe longer. Long enough for someone else to sit where you are now, running their fingers over old mortar and feeling the hum of something ancient, something earned. And maybe, just maybe, they'll sit back, smile, and say aloud, "They did this in the middle of the desert." That's insane. And they'd be right. Night has fully returned, but it feels different now. Earlier, the dark was crisp and observational stars, shining brightly, revealing secrets. But now it's gentler, softer. The wind has slowed. The dome doesn't loom anymore. It glows. You lie back against a slope of packed earth, gazing up at the yakhchal's curve. From this angle, it almost looks like the moon fell from the sky and decided to stay a while. Smooth, familiar, imperfect in a way that only handmade things can be. It's hard not to admire it, even harder not to learn from it, because as strange as it sounds, you start to see echoes of this ancient Persian dome in places you've known all your life. You've walked past energy-efficient buildings with curved roofs and ventilated atriums copies. You've seen architects talk about passive cooling as if it were a modern discovery borrowed. You've stood under high clay walls that somehow stayed cool in the summer and thought it was clever insulation. But now you know it's ancient genius resurfaced. In recent decades, engineers from the USOs, Germany, India, and Iran have studied yakhchal design in detail. Some have built modern versions using local materials. One project in Yazd incorporated solar panels with wind catchers and achieved near-zero electricity cooling for a community center. Another team recreated a dome using only tools available in 500 BCE, and it worked. Temperatures inside remained 20 degrees Celsius cooler than outside. Even tech companies have taken note. One startup used yakhchal principles to design off-grid vaccine coolers for remote African villages. Clay domes, water channels, nighttime freezing. All borrowed, all Persian. Historians might disagree on the origin dates or ritual meanings, but no one disputes the effectiveness. The yakhchal works. It doesn't need updates. It doesn't care about style. It just does the job, quietly, forever. Here's your quirky moment in 2018. A team of Iranian environmentalists built a modern yakhchal in the shape of a giant pineapple. No, really. It looked like something out of a storybook. Brick panels arranged like spiky scales, greenish tint on top. Why? Because it was meant to remind people that cooling doesn't need to be ugly or electric. And it made great sorbet, apparently. You close your eyes for a moment and breathe deep. The scent of baked clay, faint desert herbs, and cooling dust fills your nose. It smells ancient, clean, like a library made of earth. You imagine a future where cities build cool towers based on this dome, where homes use underground basins instead of humming AC units, where architects read from Zoroastrian manuals the way they now quote Le Corbusier, a future that remembers deeply and practically. Because in the face of rising heat, rising costs, and rising noise, the yakhchal reminds us quiet, low, and slow can win. And maybe, just maybe, it reminds you that survival doesn't need to be brutal. That ancient people didn't just suffer, they solved. That beauty wasn't carved from gold and marble, but from mud, patience, and wind. You shift slightly, listening to the wind thread itself through the vent behind the dome. A soft hum, not unlike breath through a reed flute. Somewhere below in the pit you visited hours ago, the last of the ice still rests. Not melting, not moving, just being. And maybe that's the real marvel here. Not that they made ice in the desert, but that they trusted the process. Built with care, aligned with stars, dug with bare hands, and somehow created something that would still be working long after their names were forgotten. You reach out and place your palm flat against the dome. Cool, dry, solid. And for a second, it feels like placing your hand on the shoulder of someone very old, very wise, and very still. You whisper, "Thank you," and mean it. You linger by the yakhchal a while longer, resting your back against the warm earth, watching the stars begin to pulse with that strange clarity only desert skies seem to offer. The night is fully matured now, no more rustling, no more distant voices. Just you and the dome and the hush. You know this place can't stay cold forever. The sun will rise again, as it always does, and the ice, no matter how carefully packed, will melt, as it always must. But that doesn't make it any less wondrous. You wonder how many others sat here like this thousands of years ago, pondering the same impermanence. Farmers, traders, engineers, even small children, show, each connected by the quiet confidence that tomorrow they could do it all again. Freeze water, move wind, build shade, shape clay into memory. The stars overhead blur slightly, not from sleep, but from something softer, understanding. The kind that comes not from books, but from walking feeling, and sitting still long enough to listen to something very old say, "This is how we did it. This is how you still can." Even the modern world with its blinking lights and humming grids could stand to remember that. You press your fingers one last time to the plaster wall. The texture stays with you. Rough, cool, honest. You stand, brush the sand from your clothes, and turn toward the trail. You don't look back. You don't need to. The yakhchal isn't going anywhere. And now for a while, neither are you. So now you've seen it. The cold heart of the desert, hidden in a dome of clay and patience. You've stepped into the shade where breath slows, where ice forms under starlight, where wind is more than breeze, its collaborator, sculptor, protector. Take a moment to let that stillness settle in. Imagine the weight of the air inside those domes. Heavy, yes, but calming too. Like a blanket pulled over your shoulders just right. No rush, no hum, no urgency. Just the knowledge that for thousands of years, people endured the desert. Not by fighting it, but by understanding it, working with it, letting the night do what the day refused. That lesson stays with you. Even now, back in your own bed, miles or continents away from Persia, the spirit of the yakhchal follows. It lingers in the silence between thoughts, in the cool air that touches your skin as you drift. in the memory of walking down those dark clay steps into a chamber colder than reason. Breathe in slowly through your nose like the wind through a kanat. Breathe out even slower, like warm air drifting through the dome's high vent. Let your shoulders loosen. Let your spine settle. Let the dome hold the rest. Sleep like ice comes quietly, unhurried. And when you wake, may your thoughts be a little clearer, a little cooler, a little more aligned with stars and earth. Good night, my friend.